Today, we're unpacking a product you've almost certainly eaten, probably without giving it a second thought. It's often jokingly called the hot dog of the sea, but as we're going to see today, that nickname really doesn't do justice to the incredible food engineering behind it. We're talking about the complete ocean-to-plate journey of imitation crab. Okay, let's dive right into this by cackling the big question everyone asks when they bite into a California roll or a seafood salad. Is there actually any real crab in imitation crab? Well, the short answer is, essentially, no way. While some manufacturers might add a microscopic drop of crab extract just for flavoring, the physical meat you're chewing on is absolutely not crab. So if it's not crab, what exactly are you putting in your body? To really understand imitation crab, we've got to start with its foundational building block, surimi. Pronounced surimi, this is a Japanese loanword that refers to a highly refined, paste-like minced fish protein. You can kind of think of surimi as a protein blank canvas. Now, in the modern industry, this canvas is made predominantly from a mild, superabundant whitefish called Alaska pollock. But to fully appreciate how a basic whitefish magically transforms into a crab leg, we need to step back in time. Section 1. A 900-year-old culinary secret. We tend to think of imitation crab as this highly processed, ultra-modern invention of the 20th century, but the foundational science behind it is actually ancient. The origins of surimi date all the way back to 12th century Japan. Coastal communities needed a way to preserve their leftover fish catch before refrigeration existed. So they figured out that by mincing the fish, washing away the impurities, and steaming it, they could create a stable fish cake known as Kamaboko. For nearly 900 years, this just remained a regional culinary tradition. Then, in the 1970s, a massive commercial pivot happened. In 1974, a Japanese company named Sugio patented a flake-type imitation crab. And get this, they originally invented it by accident while trying to create artificial jellyfish. A year later, Osaki Susan patented the familiar stick type we know today. By 1977, this product hit the U.S. market, arriving just in time to fuel the explosive rise of the California roll, making sushi accessible and affordable to a massive global audience. And this brilliantly illustrates just how big that 1970s invention became. The global imitation crab and surimi seafood market is now valued at approximately $3.6 billion annually. It literally accounts for up to 3% of the world's total fishery production. That is a massive, absolutely critical pillar of global seafood consumption. But how do we get from a swimming pollock to a billion-dollar seafood stick? Section 2. How it is actually made. Honestly, this manufacturing process is a highly controlled, almost sci-fi marvel of food engineering, and it breaks down into 4 initial steps. First up is the catch. Massive ships sustainably trawl the freezing waters of the North Pacific for Alaska pollock. Second, the fish are rapidly cleaned, gutted, and pushed through these mechanical deboners that separate the flesh into a really fine mince. Third, and this is absolutely crucial, the mince undergoes rigorous washing with fresh water to strip out water-soluble particles, fats, and blood. Finally, the washed meat is stabilized. They add cryoprotectants like sugar and sorbitol, which stop ice crystals from destroying the meat's texture, allowing it to be flash frozen into 22-pound blocks at a chilling -4 degrees Fahrenheit. Let's look a little closer at the chemistry of that washing step. Why wash the fish so intensely? Well, because washing leaves behind only the functional myofibrillar proteins, specifically myosin and actin. By isolating those specific proteins, the fish completely loses its standard, flaky nature and gains an incredible gelling capability. It essentially turns into an odorless, tasteless, bouncy, highly elastic paste. And that elasticity is the secret to everything that happens next. So, how does this paste become the final product on your plate? How do they engineer that perfect, authentic, crab-like tear? It's pure mechanical engineering. That elastic surimi paste is extruded into a wide, continuous flat sheet. Next, the sheet passes through a steamer to cook and literally set the protein gel. Once cooked, the sheet runs through incredibly precise slitting blades, slicing it into tiny ribbons just 0.6 to 1.5 millimeters wide. Finally, these ribbons are bundled together into a rope using a roughly 6% starch-based binder. Because the protein is already cooked at this point, the ribbons don't fuse back into a solid block. They just lightly stick together. It's exactly like how string cheese is manufactured, allowing you to playfully peel the imitation crab apart, fiber by fiber. Section 3. Real crab versus imitation crab. Let's do an honest nutritional reality check, comparing this marvel of food science head-to-head against the real thing. Real crab meat is, unsurprisingly, a crustacean, while imitation crab is pollock fish. Nutritionally speaking, real crab dominates in the protein department, offering about 17 grams per 100 grams serving compared to just 7 grams in the imitation stuff. Real crab also has 0 carbs, whereas imitation crab carries about 15 grams of carbohydrates per serving. Why? Because of all the added starches and sugars. But here's the real game changer: cost. Imitation crab is roughly 66% cheaper than real crab meat. It completely democratizes the flavor and texture of premium seafood for the average consumer's budget. Now, what's really interesting here is understanding exactly what makes up those extra carbs and flavors. To turn whitefish into crab, manufacturers rely on some very specific additives. You know that signature orange-red stripe on the outside? That is often from carmine, a natural red dye extracted from actual cochino bugs, alongside some paprika. Starches and egg whites act as the glue that gives it that firm, bouncy bite. And to nail the flavor profile, they drop in monosodium glutamate, MSG, alongside artificial or real crab extract to perfectly replicate that sweet, salty ocean taste. So yeah, it is undeniably a highly processed food. But, processed doesn't necessarily mean bad for the planet. As industry research consistently highlights, consumer perception actually improves when people learn that surimi relies on wild Alaska pollock. Why is that? Well, because the pollock fishery is one of the most abundant, carefully managed, and sustainable fisheries on Earth. When you compare that to the recent, really devastating population collapses of snow and king crabs that have actually forced fishery closures, imitation crab suddenly emerges as an incredibly environmentally friendly alternative to eating overfished crustaceans. Section 4. The future of fake seafood. The technology that brought us the crab stick back in the 1970s is evolving fast, and the market for plant-based seafood alternatives is absolutely exploding right now. Driven by consumers looking for zero mercury, highly sustainable, and vegan options, this sector is projected to more than double. We're talking about growing from $600 million in 2024 to a staggering $1.3 billion by 2035. The old model of just fish paste and starch is facing some really fierce, high-tech competition. So what exactly does this next generation look like? Well, first, startups are completely ditching the fish altogether, using legumes and algae to texturize plant proteins to feel just like surimi. Second, researchers are using coaxial extrusion 3D food printing, which is literally printing food layer by layer to perfectly mimic the authentic tearing behavior of actual muscle fibers. And finally, at the ultra-premium end of the scale, we're seeing the debut of cell-cultivated or lab-grown seafood. This is actual crab meat grown from a cluster of cells in a bioreactor, requiring absolutely zero animal slaughter. At the exact same time, global regulators are forcing a massive reformulation revolution on legacy surimi makers. You can't just call it crab anymore. In the US, if it's nutritionally inferior, it must legally be labeled imitation. In the UK, they've got to call them seafood sticks. But the biggest shift by far is the FDA's new 2025 healthy rule. This places strict limits on the amount of sodium and added sugars a product can have if it wants to be marketed as healthy. This is basically forcing manufacturers to clean up their ingredient lists, cutting out the cheap fillers and sugary binders that have completely defined the product for decades. Which leaves us with this final, genuinely provocative question. Imitation crab started as a 12th century fish preservation method. It evolved into a marvel of 1970s food engineering that democratized sushi for the world. But as we look ahead, with lab-grown crab meat and 3D printed algae sticks rapidly closing the texture gap, what will the word seafood even mean to us 10 years from now? Will it mean a fish pulled straight from the ocean or a perfectly structured protein printed in a clean facility? It's definitely something to chew on the next time you order a California roll.
Don't forget to like and subscribe for more How Meets History.